We have two presentations tonight. The first one is Mr. Tom Campbell, Crude Oil Politics and the Environment. Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, councillors, good evening. My name is Tom Campbell, and I've been a citizen of Kitimat for 33 years, and I live at 430 Clifford Street. Unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to speak or send a written submission to the Gateway Project presentations. But had I the opportunity, I would have reminded one of the panel, Senator Neufeld, of the comment that he made when he was a minister. And I'm sure Madam Mayor remembers the Senator's comments as you were present when they were made. Sometimes you sacrifice a community. I would have asked him if that statement included the Douglas Channel. However, tonight I'm not sure where any of you stand, and I would like to discuss concerns I have with this council's behavior, decisions, and leadership, or rather your lack of them, with regards to crude oil, corporation, politics, and the environment. Madam Mayor, councillors, Enbridge would have you believe that their proposed pipeline and the resulting tanker transportation through the Douglas Channel is perfectly safe. I am also certain they would state that they are taking every measure to avoid an incident. I am also certain that they would try and assure us that if an incident did happen, then their response to a disaster would be quick with minimal environmental impact. But how many times in recent history have corporations like Enbridge told us the same old song and dance, so that they could continue making huge profit at the risk of lives and the environment? But when man-made disasters strike, we quickly find that their assurances and promises have completely the opposite results. In order to help you move away from your neutrality and make an educated decision on what's best for this community, I would like to remind you of some man-made disasters and how they are faring today, as we tend to forget these places once they're out of the news. Chernobyl. In 1986, an explosion at this nuclear power plant killed 31 people and spread nuclear fallout that to this day has been blamed for birth defects and thousands of terminal cancer cases. Some areas of Chernobyl are still off limits today and may stay that way for many more years to come. Despite the emergency being over, the surrounding area still suffers social and economic problems. In 1985, the population of Chernobyl was 10,000. Today, the population is 0. Bhopal, India. On December 3rd, 1984, a Union Carbide plant in Bhopal had a toxic gas leak that killed 4,000 people, and to date has been blamed for more than 10,000 deaths from illnesses related to exposure to the gas. Thousands of survivors have reported numerous other health problems such as cancer and blindness. In 1989, the company that was responsible for the leak was ordered to pay compensation of $470 million US to over 500,000 people. That equals $950 a person. This year, an additional $270 million was released for aid, bringing the total package of compensation for death, cancer, blindness, and birth defects over the last 26 years to $1,490 per person, or $58 a year. To this day, the number of victims continues to grow in Bhopal, as there are still 390 tons of toxic waste material where the plant once stood that is leaking into the groundwater. Love Canal. A Niagara Falls neighborhood suffered serious consequences after being built over a chemical company's toxic waste dump. People living in the area were exposed to PCBs, dioxins, pesticides, and other chemicals. Puddles of this stuff appeared in people's homes. Children received chemical burns from playgrounds. Residents reported increases in health problems and cancer rates soared. Birth defects and miscarriages were also abnormally high. 25 years later, in 2004, the cleanup of the site has been apparently finished. But just to be safe, a barrier drainage system has been installed, along with 40 acres of synthetic liner, and a treatment facility is also in place to block future contamination. In other words, it's still contaminated, just contained. Centralia. This small town in eastern Pennsylvania had a coal mine. In 1962, the anthracite coal mine caught fire. 48 years later, it's still burning. And with 25 million tons of coal underground, it may burn for centuries more. Almost all of the townspeople have moved away due to fears of carbon monoxide poisoning, because smoke and steam can still be seen rising from the ground. Of the entire population of 1,000 people in 1981, only 7 people remain in the town. Minamata disease was the first disease linked to polluted seawater. It is a neurological disorder caused by mercury poisoning. The disease was first identified in 1956 from methylmercury from a chemical plant on the Minamata Bay in Japan. In 1968, the source of the pollution was finally stopped, and 40 years later, the bay has finally been cleaned up. Exxon Valdez. Eerily, this strikes very close to home, and the potential similarities are scary. The Exxon spill in Prince William Sound dumped 11 million gallons of crude oil on the rocky Alaskan coast. Studies from the American National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration say that most of the surface oil was gone after 3 years. Although if you dig down 1 foot in certain rocky beaches today, there is still oil. Residents of the Sound claim this spill left a legacy of divorce, suicide, and alcoholism. The Gulf oil spill. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill is the largest marine oil spill in the history of the U.S. petroleum industry. The spill started on April 20, 2010, and in the explosion, 11 workers were killed. 17 others were injured. July 15th, the leak was stopped by capping the wellhead after the well released about 4.9 million barrels of crude oil. The spill caused and is still causing extensive damage to marine and wildlife habitats, as well as the Gulf's fishing and tourism industries. Recently, in the news, scientists reported immense underwater plumes of dissolved oil not visible on the surface. BP has reported that its own expenditures of the oil spill have reached well over $3 billion. Estimates are the total cost for the accident is going to exceed $30 billion. Enbridge. Enbridge spokesperson Alan Roth was quoted in a northern BC newspaper saying, "Pipelines don't affect or impact any watersheds as they don't emit anything or take anything in." That's a pretty bold statement from Enbridge and its spokesperson. But are any of you aware of Enbridge's safety record and environmental record? If you're not, you should be. Remember that Roth stated for Enbridge, pipelines don't affect or impact watersheds as they don't emit or take anything in. Between 1999 and 2008, Enbridge lists 610 spills that released approximately 21 million liters of hydrocarbons. On July 4, 2002, an Enbridge pipeline ruptured in a marsh near the town of Cohasset, Minnesota in Itasca County, spilling 6,000 barrels of crude oil. In an attempt to keep the oil from contaminating the Mississippi River, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources set a controlled burn that lasted for 1 day and created a smoke plume about a mile high and 5 miles long. In 2006, there were 67 reported spills totaling 5,663 barrels on Enbridge's energy and transportation distribution system. In 2007, there were 65 reported spills totaling 13,777 barrels. On March 18, 2006, approximately 613 barrels of crude oil were released when a pump failed at Enbridge's Wilmar terminal in Saskatchewan. According to Enbridge, roughly half the oil was recovered. The remainder contributed to off-site impacts. January 1, 2007, an Enbridge pipeline that runs from Superior, Wisconsin to near Whitewater, Wisconsin cracked open and spilled 50,000 gallons of crude oil onto farmland and into a drainage ditch. The same pipeline was struck by construction crews on February 2, 2007 in Rusk County, Wisconsin, spilling 126,000 gallons of crude. Some of the oil filled a hole more than 20 feet deep and was reported to have contaminated the local water table. In April 2007, roughly 6,227 barrels of crude oil spilled into a field downstream of an Enbridge pumping station near Glenovin, Saskatchewan. Long-term site remediation is being attempted to bring the site to, as close as possible, to its original condition. In 2009, Enbridge Energy Partners, a U.S. affiliate of Enbridge Incorporated, agreed to pay $1.1 million to settle a lawsuit brought against the company by the state of Wisconsin for 545 environmental violations. In a news release from Wisconsin's Department of Justice, Attorney General J.B. Van Hollen said the incidents of violation were numerous and widespread and resulted in impacts to the streams, wetlands, throughout the various watersheds. The violations were occurred while building portions of the company's Southern Access Pipeline, a $2.1 billion project to transport crude oil from the oil sands region in Alberta to Chicago. In January 2009, an Enbridge pipeline leaked about 4,000 barrels of oil southeast of Fort McMurray at the company's Cheecham Terminal tank farm. It was reported in the Edmonton Journal that most of the spilled oil was contained within the berms, but about 1% of the oil sprayed into the air and coated nearby snow and trees. In April 2010, an Enbridge pipeline ruptured, spilling more than 1,500 liters of oil in Virden, Manitoba, which leaked into the Bog Hill Creek, which eventually connects to the Assiniboine River. July 2010, a leaking pipeline spilled an estimated 1 million U.S. gallons of crude oil into Talmadge Creek, leading to the Kalamazoo River in southeast Michigan, the worst oil disaster in Midwest history. Madam Mayor and councillors, imagine a company with this track record being given the responsibility of protecting our precious water resources. Imagine a man-made disaster here in the Pacific Northwest. Middle of winter, a pipeline bursts open along a remote creek or our own Kitimat River. What would their response be? How would they clean it? What about a tanker accident in the Douglas Channel? Will Enbridge take responsibility for it or pass the buck to a foreign corporation that owns that tanker? So far, British Columbia has been able to avoid most man-made disasters because of the sound judgment of its people. Let's not be the first. Remember, Enbridge's spokesperson's words, pipelines don't affect watersheds. Enbridge's words, not mine. So then, Madam Mayor, councillors, my concern is, as my representatives, I have no idea who or what you represent or support or why. Recently, a vast majority of the people in this province spoke out against the HST, legally, within the rules, and the provincial government has turned a deaf ear. Then 6 corporate coalitions attempted to block the will of the people in provincial court, but failed. Just as the provincial Liberals remained silent on the voice of the people, so do some of you sit there week after week like spineless squid, either arguing over frivolous matters or allowing iniquitous, destructive, independent decisions to be made without council or the electorate's knowledge. Your silence and your pandering speaks volumes to the people and who you truly represent. You forget who elected each and every one of you. It's time for you to focus. It's time for you to stop looking out for your own interests. It's time for you to stop looking for photo opportunities. You need to stop giving to those who have far too much and stop taking away from those who don't have enough. Pipelines don't affect or impact any watersheds, as they don't emit anything or take anything in. Between 1999 and 2008, Enbridge lists 610 spills that released 21 million liters of hydrocarbons into the watersheds. Where do you stand? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.